When the smoke clears and the headlines fade, the weight of the badge doesn't. Behind every trigger pulled is a mind that carries the aftermath. Chief Tommy Hill is leading the fight, not just for justice, but for the souls behind the shield. From officer-involved shootings to rewriting Ohio's mental health laws and legislation, this isn't politics, it's survival. On this episode of Tactical Tequila Podcast with your host, Matt Wilson. If you enjoy the show, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it to your social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. Welcome back, everyone. Matt with Tactical Tequila Podcast here. Tonight's show, we have Chief Tom Hill of Ontario Police Department in Ontario, Ohio. In a world where every decision can spark outrage and every headline hides the truth, one chief stands at the crossroads of justice and humanity. He's seen the weight of the badge, the flash of the muzzle, the silence after a shot, and the battle that begins long after the smoke clears. Chief Tom Hill isn't just fighting crime. He's fighting for the minds behind the badge. From the scars of officer-involved shootings to writing Ohio's mental health laws for those who serve. This isn't about politics, it's about survival. This is where leadership bleeds truth and the conversation doesn't flinch. Chief, welcome to the show. I appreciate your time and thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
So, getting into it, we've known each other for 20 plus years. You knew me when I was a little measly store detective at Meyer, and I knew you when you were a patrol officer. Now you're chief of police in the same city that we worked in. I want to get into the leadership and legacy that you have within the department. When you step into the chief's office every morning, what's the first thing that weighs the heaviest? And is it the badge, the budget, burden of every decision that follows after that?
Well, I'll tell you what, those are three things that hit every day. The budget is the probably the number three. The weight of what I ask my people to do every day, going to work, making sure that they're healthy, that they're as happy as they can be, and that they see me as an honest person that is truly looking out for them is what weighs heaviest on me, because every interaction has some part of that, so it's probably the weight of the badge and just making sure that every day I go to work that I honor my people for their sacrifice and putting it out there every day.
And for you, being in such a major leadership role within the city, what does leadership look like when the cameras are off and the headlines fade, especially after a critical incident for you?
It is about when you tell somebody that you've got their back, that when you have pressures outside of just your inner group. So, you have an officer involved shooting and you have a narrative that the public perceives or is fed by the media, and you have the truth. It's not bending from what the truth is. And it's being honest. It's sticking up for your people. When you tell somebody I've got your back, they have to see that you have their back. And I've always said this, even when somebody's reaching in my pocket. And what I mean by that is I've had people tell me for years, hey man, I've got your back, until it costs them something. And then when it costs you something, you look around and a lot of times those people that were there to get your back aren't necessarily there anymore. So I think it takes a critical incident where you say, hey, I've got your back, and people see the pressure that's put on you to make a decision that might be more publicly welcomed, but less what is the right thing to do. And when they see that you make the decision for what is right and what's best for your people, and it goes against everything else, that's when I think you really start to develop a trust and rapport with the people that you work with every day.
And do you believe that policing is harder today than it's ever been? And or do you think maybe that it's just more exposed with mainstream media?
I think that I don't think it's harder than it's ever been. I think that it's a trade-off technology wise. I think about, when I started this job was 30 years ago. So we didn't have Clearview AI. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have cameras all over the place. And so it's harder in the context of breaking through the social media, the media portrayal of law enforcement. It's tougher because you have to now not only, do your job, but you have to break down those false narratives that all police officers are the same. So it's harder in that respect. It's easier in the respect that technology can give you more evidence than we used to have. And even you as a store detective, you remember back in the day, you know, a lot of times we didn't have, now if you come down Terry, you've got 30 flock cameras. So you can't come in or go out of town without us having plates that, if you tell me it's a red Chevy northbound on Lex Spring Mill, I'm going to probably have that Chevy on video. Back in the day, you had to run out and chase a car down on foot, and so it's much harder because of the social aspect of the job, but it's easier because, in my opinion, because of the technology out there.
Now, being a protector of the public and also a guardian of your officers, how do you find balance between doing both?
Truth. I think that the truth never needs a defense. And I think that if you're honest and you're transparent, it balances itself out. Um, I mean, that's the easiest answer I can give you. It's always been easy for me to be in the position I'm in because I've never lied about anything and I've never covered anything up. I tell my people all the time that we make mistakes and we're human and we're allowed to make mistakes. And I noticed when I took over being the chief, I noticed that we penalize people for common mistakes. And so you don't do a report the right way, or you forget something here or there, and it turns into a disciplinary matter. And I don't know that any other job is like that. I think most jobs are, when you make an honest mistake, it's, hey, you forgot to do this, please get this done. So I lately we've been trying to change that narrative, and we're trying to be honest with ourselves when we can do better, be honest with the public when we make a mistake, but fiercely defend our officers when they're in the right.
In talking about decisions such as that, defending officers and stuff, what would you say the toughest or maybe even one of the decisions that keeps you up at night?
Mm. I think I think officer involved shootings are the hardest because I see the effect it has on our people, but I also know that there's a family on the other side of it, that if it, God forbid, it's a fatal officer involved shooting, that they lose a loved one as well. And you never lose that human aspect to it. So I think what keeps me up at night is making sure that I'm balancing the the care and the the love of the family member that was involved in the shooting, but also that our people did the right thing and that we take care of them as well and make sure that they survive, to live another day, to fight another day, to enjoy their lives when they're off duty. So that's probably that's been the toughest one for me.
Is there a specific point in time where you realized that leadership wasn't just about taking care of the men and women, but it was actually leading them through the trauma and this mental health stigma that law enforcement has?
Yeah. Uh, I want to say when I took over in 2017, I kind of recognized pretty quickly that we didn't have a wellness program. And I just, it was shocking to me that I had come up through the ranks and I didn't focus on it. And so I think about it in 2018, early 2019, that was when I kind of had the epiphany that leadership is about making sure that we set a a safety net for our people so that when they're in need, we're not just taking care of their physical needs, but we're also taking care of their mental health needs as well.
Talking about officer involved shootings, what would you say the toughest conversation that you've ever had to have with an officer after one of those critical incidents is?
In Ohio, when you're involved in an officer involved shooting, they will go in front of the grand jury. So it's a tough conversation to have with an officer to say, we've reviewed everything. You were within our use of force policy. The actions you took were necessary to defend yourself or others. Um, it's ruled a justified shooting through the police department. However, it still has to go in front of a jury of your peers, and you still have the chance to be indicted. And that's a tough conversation to have with somebody because when you're, I see the trauma that's involved with that situation and the fear after it happens, and you kind of are re-victimizing or that that cycle starts all over again.
Now, how do you deal with that as the chief? Let's say they do get indicted for the OIS. How do you take care of your officers still while they're now doing this?
Well, that becomes a whole different problem. Um, I would have to. So we've been involved in two officer involved shootings, one fatal officer involved shooting, and they've all been justified. They've all been cleared through the grand jury. But I would venture to say that if there was a situation that happened where an officer was involved and it did get indicted, that it would be case specific. But I would say that once again, if it falls in line with constitutional law and if it falls in line with our policies and procedures, that my opinion would not change and my support for that officer would not change.
When you hear that an OIS has happened, and for those listeners, I keep saying OIS, and OIS means officer involved shooting. Or when you hear, an officer down, what's the first thought that goes through your mind as a chief?
Their families. Um, you know, the first the first time that I ever dealt with an officer involved shooting was Deputy Brandy Winfield from the Marion County Sheriff's Department. He was shot and killed in the line of duty October 14th, 2004. So we're 2 days past the anniversary of his shooting. And I remember the morning distinctly that I heard that he was shot and killed. I started in Marion County. I worked with Brandy. As a matter of fact, the first time that I ever went to a bar and had an alcoholic beverage, it was with Brandy. And he was just an amazing dude to work with. Came from a long history of law enforcement officers. His dad was a Marion police officer, brother was a Marion police officer, grandpa was a Marion police officer. He was a Marion County Sheriff's deputy. And the impact that Brandy's death had on his family, I never forgot. And, that was the first time that I had ever dealt with something like that. So whenever I hear an officer involved shooting, I immediately go to, the children, the spouses, and then secondarily then his department family.
Now, in talking about the department and the family within, this all happens. How do you, and I know you mentioned a little bit about the wellness program that you have going on, but how do you protect the officer's mental well-being while ensuring transparency to, the community?
Well, you don't. So first of all, there's little things that we can do to protect our officers. So one thing that comes to my mind is that you don't force an officer to make a statement right after a shooting happens. When you being in the military, you being involved in traumatic events, you remember a lot of stuff 2 days later that you don't remember at the time. And people don't understand, why don't we do those statements right away? And the reason why we don't push somebody to write a statement is they're still in the throes of that trauma. So the one thing that we do is we tell them, you know, don't give a statement. Call your FOP representative, your lawyer. They have the right to be protected as well. That's the first thing. Number two, we have developed a 30-minute. So we give our officers a free 30 minutes a day every day to go work out. So we built a gym. I built a gym back in 2019 into 2020, because part of the wellness program is mentally and physically. And so the one thing that we, along with city council, allowed our people to do are every day they have 30 minutes, and it doesn't involve their break time. It doesn't involve their lunch period, but it's 30 minutes to go up and get on the treadmill or do some type of working out. So that's the first thing. They can do that every day, as long as, calls permitting. The second thing is, anytime there's a traumatic event like we're talking about, it might be a fatal accident. It could be a bad death scene. That's when we'll have our supervisors will tell the officers involved, go up there, get on the treadmill for 30 minutes. I just want you walking, do something. But that's the most important time to get that physical exertion going, because that's the time that those traumatic events latch onto you inside. And science tells us that if we get our people up and get them moving around, get some of that negative energy out, that it has a healing effect, and it doesn't let those traumatic memories embed themselves.
What would you say the public gets wrong most of the time about officer involved shootings?
I would say that with the advent of body worn cameras, what they get wrong is the perspective of the camera only. So, cameras are only one view, and sometimes it doesn't capture what the officer sees. It only captures what the camera sees. So a lot of times people will say, well, why did the officer do this, or why did he do that? Why did she do this? Why did she do that? And typically, if you, first of all, if you can see what the officer sees, you might that might answer that question. A lot of times when you deal with an officer involved shooting with somebody that's got an edged weapon, a knife, a sword, something like that, our training tells us that we need to be, it used to be a 25-foot rule. So in the academy, you're trained that you need to be 25 feet away. Because even if at the point of attack where a person is using an edge weapon and they're coming after you, and you're trying to take shots to defend yourself or other people, they easily can close that gap. Even if you put rounds that would be fatal, they can close that 25 feet and still fatally wound the officer. So, so the one thing that I hear all the time is, well, why did the officer shoot when the person was 25 feet away? Well, that's because there's been case studies where, if we, now the rule is 31 feet away. So typically what people get wrong is the why, that because they don't have the training, you know, and we don't do probably a very good job of explaining the why. I've never heard somebody say there's a 31-foot rule that we're trained. So, in a press conference, say, training says, and it was an FBI case actually that had happened, and that's when law enforcement moved from the 9mm to the 40 caliber, because they had a situation where they had a, per, a suspect that was high on PCP, and they shot 35 times with 9mm, and he still was able to reach the agents and stab them. So I would say those are the two things that they get wrong, is the perspective of the officer, and then usually with edged weapons especially, it's why didn't you shoot him in the leg? Why didn't you do this? And the reality is we don't have the time to do that. So we aim center mass because that gives us the greatest chance of inflicting some type of injury that stops the attack.
You mentioned the perspective of body cams. How do you decide to release the footage, and what weighs into that decision?
Well, I think the first part of what weighs into the decision is, can we? Uh, because typically with an officer involved shooting, you're going to have a court case. So the prosecutor will usually get a hold of the prosecutor and ask them what they feel comfortable with us releasing. You don't want to try the case in the public. And funny enough, the reason sometimes why we don't release it is because we want to preserve a fair trial for the defendant if the defendant is still alive. And so, we're trying to look out for them. And typically when we don't release, there's this supposition from the public that we're hiding something, covering something up. That's just not true at all. When you first heard about body cameras, the old guys were like, "Oh, here we go," and you think that it's gonna be the thing that condemns all officers. And what we've learned is it's the one thing that usually proves that our officers did nothing wrong. And so very quickly, our officers they feel good that they have the body cams on, but but what weighs into it is just what will the prosecutor let us release, and if we would release it, would that somehow prejudice a potential jury against the suspect?
Do you ever feel that the media and politics ever twist things about an OIS?
Yes, absolutely.
And
People, I can tell you that people have a hard time disengaging from their emotions and disengaging from their internal beliefs to look at things in a fair manner. And it's funny because what you hear about law enforcement all the time is that we're the ones that aren't looking at things in a fair manner. And to be honest, we're the ones that every day you go out, you deal typically with the worst of the worst. Everybody lies to you because they're self preservation. They don't want to get in trouble for anything. So 20 years of everybody treating you like you're the bad guy and lying to you and trying to pull one over on you. And it'd be very easy for us to be the ones that have a hard time being neutral, a neutral arbiter when we go into a call. And we train our people. Doesn't matter how many times you've been to a call, you have to be neutral. You have to go into a call not presuming anything. And so, that's part of all that, I guess.
after an officer pulls the trigger, what do you think the emotional toll is on an officer when they're involved in a OIS?
Well, first, I think taking a human life, if that's what ends, if that's the ultimate result of what happens, I think that I don't know that anybody knows how that feels until it happens. So I think that's the first part of it, is knowing that you ended somebody's life. And then I think the second part of it is um, the fear of what's going to happen next. You know, you might know that you did everything right, and it might be an absolutely justified shooting, but depending on the political climate, depending on where you're at, it could be turned, around on you. And so I think that I have to believe in what I've seen with our people. Are the first part of it is hurting or injuring somebody, and then secondly, it's the fear of knowing you did something right, and but not knowing that it's going to go that way.
Now, kind of diving into your wellness program, you give officers 30 minutes a day to do the gym and get physically active. What else in the wellness program do you add to an officer's emotional well-being?
So what we set up is we have our chaplain, is her name is Jill Waite. She's our chaplain, but she's also our department counselor. She's trained in EMDR, and I don't know if you know what that is or not, but
I
EMDR is a
do, yeah.
newer, yeah, that's a great training. That training, it's great for our people that have been through traumatic events. So, and then what we do is we facilitate twice a year that our people have to go in front of Jill. So they've got to sit down, and whether they want to talk or not is completely up to them. But we facilitate a face-to-face meeting twice a year. They can go in and they can talk about football, the weather, or whatever they want to talk about. And it's amazing because the first time we did that, I thought, because you being a military guy, and you know how it is, it's like, I'm good, I don't need help, help somebody else. But when you get when our people sit in front of Jill, it's, you'll think, well, they're going to be in and out in 5 minutes, and then an hour later they're still in talking. So that's one. So that's kind of very important that you set up that meeting. They don't have to talk. You can't force somebody to talk, nor would you want to, but we definitely make that available for them. And then I guess the second part of what we do is that we try to get our officers to come in with any type of things that are going on in their personal lives. You know, back in 2020, we had the youngest police department that Ontario has ever had, and we had the youngest supervisors Ontario has ever had. And as a young person, a lot of times your life is not, you know, grounded, or there's not a lot of foundation there. You're young, you're going to go out and save the world. You're going to solve all the world's problems. You're probably not married. You probably don't have kids. And so we learned pretty early on that we wanted to make sure that our people had a avenue. If they were newly married, they had, new families, that they were able also to bring those things to our counselor, and try to help out in that category as well, because there's this old adage that you don't bring your home to work. And that's not true. Absolutely, you do that. And so we want our people healthy at home, so when they come to work, they're healthy at work as well. And we want them at work to be as healthy as they can, so when they go home, because you do take your job with you home, we want them to have tools to, when they go home, to be able to talk to their spouse and to be able to decompress.
After a traumatic incident, do you find that your officers are more willing to go into therapy and to discuss what they, have just went through?
That's really it's kind of a case by case basis. Um, I think that the stigma that we worked under back in the day, when you were in the military, and when I was new into law enforcement, it was way different. And I think now, uh, our people, I know now that our people understand that we want them to offload that stuff to us. Back in the day, you didn't talk about it. You went to work, you did your job, you went home, and you dealt with it on your own. And that's not the case now. So I do think that they're more willing to do that. You still have some tough people that are, man, they'll take it on the chin, and but eventually I think it always comes back to that opening up those doors and making people feel safe to talk. They eventually will walk through that door.
Well, and talking about those tough people, and I'm guilty of even doing that myself, but you stuff all of this into a box, and at some point the lid to the box comes off.
Yep.
And if you're not willing to talk with those around you, talk with someone objectively, in order to help mitigate that lid, exploding off.
Yeah.
And that lid could be as much as, an officer committing domestic violence on their spouse, or, it could be even worst case scenario, suicide. And, law enforcement has military too. Um, you know, back in the day, when an officer, wouldn't talk about things, then they retire, they carry all that with them, and they just can't handle it anymore. And, it's so unfortunate that we've lost so many good people because they either didn't want to get the help, they couldn't get the help, and Now, I think it's a phenomenal thing that you're doing with your department, and I know there are probably other departments across the U.S. that are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I urge anybody that's been involved in a traumatic event that you find that one person that you can offload this stuff to. You're exactly right. I don't matter who it is, but the first part of healing is expressing it. You've got to get it out, because when it stays in there, it gets rotten, and it takes everything. So the first thing is talk to somebody that it doesn't have to, you're right, it doesn't have to be somebody at work. But I think also understanding that it's very much tougher to stay healthy and to do those things, it, kind of, than it is to keep it inside. And so, you got to remove that stigma that keeping it inside is tougher, and it's nobody expects you to do that. Nobody wants you to do that. You can't be 100% for your family, and be there for your family and be there for your job if you hold all that inside. And I think that you're going to start to see more wellness programs pop up through agencies. It takes one agency to say enough is enough. We want our people to know that we care about them, that we want them to be healthy. I want my people to love coming to work, and I want them to be happy when they're home. It's like I want them to, it shouldn't be a death sentence or a depressionary job. It should be something where you gain some satisfaction out of it. And human beings aren't equipped to see these traumatic events. That's not something that you're born with. And so you really have to learn how to do it. And I look, I think about our military heroes. I think about the fire department guys. We're all together in this, and I'll tell you something that we've done for the military, and I wish I had a picture for you, but I realized a long time ago, I keep saying I realize, but that isn't that part, isn't that what we do? We realize it's a lifetime of learning. But I would go and we would talk to vets, and they'd say you would talk to them, and they'd be in some type of crisis, and they would say, were you ever in the military? And you say, no, I wasn't. And there's a disconnect there immediately. And I believe that, because veterans, that combat vets or vets in general, understand each other better than I could ever understand them. And so what we did was, everybody that is a veteran in our police department, we have a pin that recognizes them as a veteran, and then their patches, they have their patch, and then they have the armed forces that they served in. So that way,
Okay.
every time that you go to a call, it's there on their patch, and that's the first thing people see. And then the last thing we did is we've got magnets, and when you go out on your tour of duty every day, you have your own personal magnet that you can put on your car, and it says what branch of service that you served in. And I'll tell you, when our people walk up to a call and it's a vet that needs help, it's amazing. The first thing they say is, oh man, you were in the military, and it breaks down those barriers. And it's just little things like that just I don't know, it's just little things like that make the world a better place, and make it easier to talk to people.
Now, moving into more mental health and the legislation that you're trying to push through for officers, you're working on mental health legislation. What's the biggest obstacle that's standing in your way?
Well, if I could, I would like to go back, and I'll go ahead and start from the beginning on this, because this is the biggest travesty, the most disgusting, wretched thing that I didn't know existed in our system. So we had an officer shot and wounded in the line of duty. He was shot 3 times, and he was shot in February 11th of 2024. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and you know, I mean, just that whole scenario. If you ask what keeps me up at night, that's it. Um, and it was bad enough to go through to experience it as a chief, let alone to worry about your officer that was shot. Our officer's name was Dylan Bailey, and worrying about him every single day, worrying that for what I'm doing as the chief, what I'm setting in place gives him the best opportunity to survive, gives him the best opportunity to live a good, happy life when this is all over with. It is the most stressful thing that I've ever been through, because I didn't want one thing that I did to set him back. And so when this first happened, I didn't realize all of the things that happened in Ohio. So immediately after he was shot, he went through the medical, and as he's going through the medical, he went to OPNF, which is our pension board, and also workers' comp. And the first hard thing that we had happen through workers' comp was, obviously he had the physical injury, and with the physical injury, he basically, in a nutshell, he's 100% disabled. He can never run again. So, in our job, we have a job description that we have to meet. I have to be able to climb a fence. I have to be able to shoot a gun. I have to be able to run. He can't run. So that was the first hurdle. So you think that, the guy that's been shot 3 times that medically can't run would be offered a 70, 80%, 100% retirement, would be taken care of medically the rest of his life. And what we found out is that's absolutely not true. He was offered an 18% settlement through workers' comp, and he was offered I believe a 38% retirement through OPNF. 29 years old, police officer for 7 years, a 14-month-old son, and the thank you that our pension board was going to give him and the Bureau of Workers' Comp was going to give him was that. So that's the first thing. Unbelievable to me. So while he's going through the trauma of all of this, now he's being told by an attorney, take what you can get, because your department's not going to be able to bring you back. They can't, because you don't fit. You can't run anymore. You don't fit the job description. So this poor guy is not only dealing with that, but he's dealing with just the physical injury. Obviously, PTSD comes along with this. I don't care if you're just shot at. He's hit 3 times, stayed in the fight the whole time, stayed, while he's got 2 tourniquets on his leg, is covering the windows, making sure his brother officers are safe, making sure all of the civilians out there are safe. The absolute worst case scenario I've ever seen officer involved shooting was this one. How our officers performed that day is heroic. How nobody else got wounded, or that our officers didn't shoot anybody by mistake because there were people running everywhere. We didn't know who the suspect was at the time. And then and when you clean all that off the slate, we've got a guy that's being told, we'll give you 18%, we'll give you a 38% retirement. And if you take the 38% retirement, we're going to take your peace officer certificate from you. That's the thank you that he was given. So on top of that, we now are trying to get him into counseling for his PTSD. What I didn't realize about in Ohio is that in order for you to get PTSD covered, so that he's not paying $250 to $500 a shot through insurance or out of his own pocket, Ohio requires that you prove that the PTSD is directly related to the injury. He had to prove that the reason he had PTSD was because he got shot. It couldn't just be that he got shot and that he got shot at and all of the things that happened. He had to absolutely prove. And on top of that, when he went to the doctor, and he would have one doctor say, yes, PTSD is related to the injury. Workers' comp would come back and say, well, we don't agree. We're going to have to do it again. And they did it again. And the doctor came back and said, it's related to the injury. The third time, ironically, the doctor came back and said, no, PTSD is separate. So that's all, part of what we have been going through for the last year and a half. What ended up happening, thanks to Mayor Knapp, thanks to City Council, is they allowed me to create an administrative detective position for our officer that is outside of the job description. It's a directive-based position. And when we found out that he was being dishonored by Ohio BWC and our pension program, when we found out that he was going to, that's all he was getting, we were able to bring him back and keep him. Thank God that we were able to do that. And once again, it's because of Ontario City Council, because of Mayor Knapp, because of Mayor Hutchinson at the time, that we're able to do that. So, you know, now where we're at with this whole thing is we were able to go to, on behalf of the city, the mayor and myself and the service director and the assistant chief went to the industrial commission, and we argued on behalf of Officer Bailey, and we were able to at first keep BWC from appealing the decision to give him a settlement. And then unbelievably, after the city went to BWC and the industrial commission and told them, we are not fighting this claim, we want our officer taken care of, we want the best settlement that he can get, unbelievably, the broker on behalf of the city fought the claim, even after the city told them that they didn't want the claim fought. And the mayor, how he was able to maneuver this with the conversations he had, they just last week went back to the industrial commission on behalf of Officer Bailey, and he was finally given a 48% settlement, which basically just means that the pain and suffering that he went through will be, so he'll be given a lump sum of money that he can put back and that he can use to take care of himself. And he's still working. He's still gainfully employed. Hopefully he's there for the next 30 years because he's one hell of an officer. And if you saw the things that he's done in the line of duty before this, he's just he is everything that you could ever want in a police officer. So I know I'm rambling, man, but I'll tell you, it was disgusting to me what happened, and I couldn't believe it. And it all worked out in the end, and and he's with us, and Dylan's back to work, and we love him, and we're glad that he's there. But what he suffered, no one should ever have to suffer. And so I'm working with Mark Romanchuk, who is he's in the Ohio legislature. And then I've just got a hold of Jay McDonald he's the president of the FOP. And we're kind of working on some things to try to get a presumption. So if you were to have a heart attack as a police officer in the state of Ohio, their presumption is that it's caused by the job, medically be taken care of. You would receive probably a decent disability retirement, and it'd be all good. So what we're trying to do right now is to say that if an officer is seriously wounded in the line of duty, whether they're hit by a car or whatever, that the trauma that comes along with that, the PTSD that comes along with that, the presumption is that it's caused by the injury, the PTSD is, so that we don't have to play this game and go through 75 doctors, that are probably at the end of the day, I'm not even gonna say it, but
on the payroll.
Yes, so we're trying to get that as a presumption. What I have been told is, and I don't know that this is the absolute case, but what I've been told is it's the Ohio Chamber of Commerce that is vehemently fighting this, because if they open up this for officers, they have to open it up for businesses. And of course, businesses don't want to be on the hook for the PTSD coverage, I guess, or so what I'm being told is that they're the ones that are fighting it. I don't know I don't know if that's true or not. I don't care. At the end of the day, I don't care what the problem is. We need to take care of our first responders. We need to take care of our firemen and our police officers. We need to take care of our veterans. These are the people that are out there putting their lives on the line. And it should never be in question what's going to happen if you get shot and wounded in the line of duty. It should be, this is what happens. You're going to be taken care of. You don't have anything to worry about. His employment attorney is saying, man, we're going to have to get the best we can get for you. You're going to have to take whatever you can get. And then you're going to have to get retrained. BWC had the nerve to call Dylan after they offered him an absolute disgraceful amount, and they said, hey, we want to get you back into a job fair so we can get you trained in at what you're good at. Well, if they'd asked, if that would have happened to me, if that would have been said to me, the first thing I would have said was, well, obviously what he's good at is what he's doing, and the bedside manner in that is disgusting.
Agreed.
That you would call a guy when he is going through these things and offer to retrain him to do anything other than obviously what he was born to do.
So, what can departments do to move more from the reactive state to the proactive in caring for officers' mental wellness?
Develop a mental health and wellness program. Put it into your directives. Make a policy, because once you put it on paper, you have to follow it. So make clear guidelines for your people of what's expected. And what I mean by what's expected is, this is what we want you to do. We want you twice a year to be brave, to sit down in front of somebody and share what's going on in your life. Share what's going on. We want the policy to break down the stigma of saying it's okay to talk. Not only is it okay to talk, but it's our policy. It's our position that we want you to talk, that we want to be there for you, that we want you to be healthy. Because I think when an officer reads that in a policy, they realize that it's okay. And if it's unwritten, then they don't know. And, I've always believed that if you got to tell somebody what's expected of them before you can hold them accountable. And I think that holds true for wellness programs. I think that you have to put it out on paper so that people know it's okay. And it's the policy position of this department that we expect that you dump it on us, that you give us something to work with so we can take care of you. So I think that's the first thing. I think you've got to be brave and you've got to step out and say, this is what we expect. And then I think the other thing that you have to make sure of is that officers know that if they're going through something, if they're in the throes of some type of anxiety, that if we're not going to hold it against them. Remember, how God back in the day, if somebody knew that you were depressed or you had depression or you had anxiety, you'd have to worry about a department doing a fit for duty test with you. That doesn't happen. This should never happen. You should have anxiety doing this job. And so making officers feel safe that if they do have some type of mental illness or mental condition, that's not going to be used against them, that it's not going to be spoken about. I don't even need to know about it. All I need to know is that if you're hurting and you need help, that you're getting taken care of. That's all I need to know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, then the specifics of it comes down to HIPAA and everything else in that nature, but it's definitely a stigma that we need to break. It's also a stigma that the military had for many years. If you were struggling with PTSD or something mental health wise, you were told to look, suck it up, like embrace
Uh-huh.
the suck and move on with it. And again, that just comes back to we've lost so many good people that haven't received the help. And that's where, now people are starting to see that. And, I've had some mental health therapists on the show. I've had Sergeant Ashley Smith. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she
Yep.
she's doing their mental wellness program out in New York, New Jersey area.
Yeah.
And she covers like a few departments based on that. So like if, the chief from one department calls her and says, hey, my officer needs some help, like she puts everything down and says, look, okay, you know what? If this is about taking care of your officer, she says, I'm your girl. And she's
Yeah.
like, if you're trying to fuck over
That's
your
amazing.
officer, then she's
Yeah.
like, I'm not, and you better buck up because now I'm coming for you.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is it every 22 hours? I think that veterans, I think suicide's every 22 hours.
See,
That's
I know that there's way too many. As
yeah.
far as
Well,
like the specifics,
one a year is too many. Absolutely.
agreed.
But yeah, it's that you can't, we want our people at their best. We want our people at their best when they're at home. We want our people at their best when they're living their lives. Why should a military job or a law enforcement job, why should that lead to alcoholism? Why should that lead to depression? Why, you know, and I feel like you ask about leadership, and it's all about, that's what it's about. It's I'm not willing to use our people as cannon fodder, because they're not. And I feel like you got that's where we have to have people that are in leadership positions step up and say enough is enough. We're going to do whatever we can do to keep our people healthy. It's funny. We just hired a new guy, and and it was funny. I was talking to him, and I said, he's, what, and the question was, what do you expect? And I'm like, my only expectation is that you come to work every day and you're happy, you love your job, you love your family, you treat people the right way. You treat, every time you come in contact with somebody in the street, you treat that person like that's your mom, that's your dad, that's your brother, that's your sister, and that you're happy, that you go home every night, and you learn something new every day. It's like, if you do that, if you can do that, that's all I want. That's all I want for our people. And we can go a long way to help that out, if we put the tools out there for them to grab a hold of, and use them along the way.
So now, in trying to move this legislation forward, how do you convince politicians who've never worn the badge to push this legislation through?
Well, I would invite them to come out and ride along with us. First of all, I think that you can never understand what a military person goes through unless you were in the military and you did it, or you were embedded with them somehow. And I don't think you're ever going to understand what a police officer or a fire department personnel or paramedic goes through until you're out there riding along with them. And the next thing I would say is, if it was your son or your daughter that was on the street that put a bulletproof vest on every day, with the hopes that if they did get shot, it was in that small area that they're wearing the vest. If that was your son or your daughter, how would you want them taken care of after the fact? Because what I've learned about life is, until once again somebody's digging into your pocket, or it's your daughter, or it's your son, or it's your mom, or it's your dad, we don't care too much. And I think that it would go a long way if it became personal for them.
I would agree with you 100%. Moving into like the recovery aspect of critical incidences that police officers deal with, what's a good recovery look like for an officer?
So I can tell you, for Officer Dylan Bailey, uh, continued talking. First of all, that's a great that's a great first step. He was blessed to have a dog. He's got a service dog, and they're called Valor, and they are amazing, absolutely amazing. And so his dog's name is Tilly, and she is trained in recognizing the anxiety, when there's an anxiety response. And I'll tell you, it's made a world of difference for Dylan. Gary Sinise, who is an angel, just for Dylan was able to go to Tennessee, I think about a month ago, and he was spent a week down there with Gary Sinise, and they had all kinds of great things for their. And I know Gary Sinise does a lot for the military as well. So, but ultimately, in my opinion, a good recovery is a lifetime. You know, it's, and I would love to sit here and tell you that that there's in 3 years, 27 days, 2 hours and 50 seconds, it's going to click, and that's going to be the recovery. And what I've learned watching Dylan is that recovery comes in steps. You get over one wall, and then another one pops up, and then we get over the next wall and another one pops up. And that builds resilience over time. And I think the farther that you get away from an incident, I think the more time you have to I think hopefully, I think the hope is that that harshness starts to mitigate itself away. So I think that the farther that you get away from something, the better. And I lost my train of thought because there was another thing I wanted to say. But oh, and then I think the last part of it is that never expect I always want Dylan to know, and I use Dylan, and I know that we've had plenty of officers that are going through PTSD, but that's the one that I can really attach to right now. But letting Dylan know that there's never a moment that I believe that everything's just going to be okay. And it's funny because we went through the criminal trial, and I think people were I think that there's this predisposition to believe that once the trial's over, we're going to all take a big deep breath and it's all going to be better again. And look, it was amazing. This guy, this absolute scumbag, criminal scumbag, he got 228 years in prison, 228 glorious years in prison. 208 of those are mandatory. He was convicted on 42 of 44 counts. And the only reason he wasn't convicted of 2 of those counts were because the prosecutor let him go. So when all that happened, you sit back and you feel justice for your people, and it's a great thing. But I never wanted Dylan to believe that I felt like there was anything other than this is just one good thing, but it's not any real thing. That tomorrow's going to be another day, and that's going to be something we can put away, but that we're still here every second of the day. I think about you every second of the day. Anything you need, we're going to do for you. When we tell you we're going to be there, we're going to be there. And the recovery is separate of all of that other stuff. And it's just a day by day thing. And you can't, and I would say a good recovery is one that's not forced. You can't force recovery. You've got to let everything happens on its own time. And you've got to let people understand, because I think that there's a push, and I've heard it before, for somebody to say, BWC called. How long is this guy going to be off? What's the time frame here? It's like there is no time frame. We live every day and we recover every day from things that happened 20 years ago, and that in the military.
Yeah.
That you can't force recovery, and you can't force that stuff. You just got to be consistent in there and let the recovery take over, take on its own life.
The individual that's dealing with it always, and I love this saying, and I feel like I want to say that I coined it, but just in case I didn't, tomorrow's always a new day with new outcomes, new possibilities. You never know what's going to happen. So you have to treat, you could be dealing with the worst day today. Tomorrow's always a new day. You have to start over. You have to see how that day is going to play out. But no matter what you do, you have to dig down deep and try and keep that positivity and think about that,
That's a great point. And I want to, what you just said is that is the key, is that how do you get into the psyche of somebody who has been through a traumatic event? And, we have that catastrophic way of thinking. It's never going to get any better. It's always going to be this way. And how do we get in there? And, one of the things that I've talked to Dylan about is that what good is going to come out of this? So, case in point, there's no Purple Heart Award, Blue Angel Award, whatever you want to call it. There's no serious injury in the line of duty award for an Ohio officer. I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe there's no award that says, you know, you got shot 3 times. We're to the point right now where he might lose his foot. We don't know yet. He's going for surgery in December. But there's no award, and that's imagine, look at the military. I mean, the one thing that I love about the military is they award their people, and you have to award your people. And so one thing that we worked through with Mark Romanchuk is that there is now legislation for an award like that. I believe it's going to be a law enforcement Purple Heart Award. And with that, there's going to be some things that attach. You can get a plate now, and it's going to kind of be along the same format as a military Purple Heart, but it's just obviously for law enforcement. I don't know if it's going to be called that for sure, but I know there's legislation now put forward with that. Although we had an award for him, I had to go down to Florida before I could find one. He was awarded a Purple Heart through the Police Hall of Fame down in Florida. So when somebody's sitting back and they're thinking, it's all doom and gloom, and I know this is a bad day, but tomorrow could be a better day. Maybe one of the greatest things that you can think about is there's going to be something good that comes out of this, and try to find that one thing. And if it's that from this point moving forward, though, there's going to be this award, or that one of these days when the legislation gets passed and Ohio does the right thing, and BWC does the right thing, and OPNF does the right thing, if all of the bad, because I've talked to Dylan about this, if everything he went through made that change, then damn, man, it was worth it. And it's hard to say that, but he has said that. And that's a hell of a thing to say when you're the one that got shot 3 times and you've suffered the way he has suffered. But I think that that's part of it. It's like, how do you look at somebody and say it was a bad day today, but tomorrow's going to be better? That's a great question, man. And I think that part of it is just something good is going to come out of it, and you've got to find whatever that is.
Well, and I think as to stay with positivity, if you get up every morning and you say to yourself, here's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's how I'm going to better myself today. I think as long as you start telling yourself that, and the more that you speak positive ideas and positive statements into your life begins to change for the positive side of things. It's when you let your mind go into these negative spaces and you just dwell and stay in those bad areas that you always feel like everybody's out to get you. Nobody's here to help you. And it's so unfortunate, because if people just change their mind, their lives would change, almost instantly.
Well, the old adage that misery loves company. And I guess part of it is to surround yourself with people that are positive, with people that care about you, with people that want the best for you. Because I think part of healing is we heal for ourselves, but we also heal for others too. But I think that surrounding yourself with positive people is important. And I think what you said is true. What they say, that if you say something 7 times a day for 21 days, you actually will believe it after that 21st day. There's some type of scientific model.
Well,
And
if you do any activity for 21 days, it starts to become a habit. And I'm a firm believer in that. I've done it myself, and it's worked for me. So I know it can work for others.
yeah, yeah,
Now, you talked about healing others. How do you support the families that are also going through this?
it's a great question. And that's something that as a chief, I didn't focus on right away, because you're so inundated with, your officer, that you don't think about the spouse. And it took my wife really to say, do I need to reach out to to Dylan's wife to make sure she's okay, for me to say, oh, come on, this isn't just about Dylan. And so in Ohio, there's a thing called the Bridge, and it's a great program. They are an absolutely amazing people. And we found out about the Bridge, and what it is basically it's a retreat, and it's a retreat for officers and their spouse who have been involved in a traumatic event like Dylan was, and we were able to get them into this program right away, and they were able to get away for a weekend, and they're put with people that are going through trauma themselves, and it gives the spouse a chance to take a deep breath because they're the ones that see it every day. They're the ones that suffer every day. And I'll tell you, they're the ones that are the bravest of the brave. Every time, I see Mrs. Bailey and I see her strength, it's just amazing to me. And it was my wife actually that was like, has anybody asked about Dylan's wife? And it's like, oh my God. And so that's part of it. And then the second part of it is, so the IACP is going to be out in Denver, Colorado. It's actually starts tomorrow. And my wife actually goes with me to these because we can pay a fee out of our pocket, and she can go to the classes with me. And there's a lot of trauma based classes that she, as a wife of a chief of police and also a police officer, she can go to, she can learn, then she can come back and she can put into play for the other wives. And likewise, I say wives, but there's also some spouses that are husbands out there too. So I think, that's what making sure that you include the spouse into it, and understand that they're dealing with just as much trauma, and probably even more than even you are, that you don't even see those things. So including them in, making sure that they're healthy, making sure that if they need anything, you can get them into counseling. Just calling and saying, how are you doing? What can we do for you? Is important, but don't forget about the spouse.
Now, I'm going to throw some rapid fire questions at you. What's heavier, the badge on your chest or the memories that come with it?
The memories that come with it.
When an officer pulls the trigger, what haunts them more, the shot fired or the silence after?
The shot fired.
Would you rather face public outrage or lose one more officer to silent suffering?
Public outrage.
What's one truth about policing you wish the public could feel and not just hear?
I wish the public could walk in the shoes of a police officer just for one day.
In one word, what does survival mean behind the badge?
Victory.
Well, Chief, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Where can everyone find you guys on social media?
So we are on Facebook. So it's Ontario Police Department USA. We also have a website. It's ontpd.com. So that's another way that they can get a hold of us. And those are really the two main sources of social media that we have.
Okay. Well, again, I thank you for your time, and it's good seeing you, brother. It's
Hey,
been far too long.
absolutely, man. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everyone.